Hi, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Father Bill W. I'm an Episcopal priest living here in Austin, Texas, a member of Alcoholics Anonymous in long-term recovery. And if you haven't done so already, I'd encourage you to go and visit our website. It's called A Two-Way Prayer, and it teaches you the practice of prayer and meditation that they used to do in early AA. And also, if you haven't done so, we're doing a series of Zoom workshops, and it's on the subject of two-way prayer. And if you would write me at twowayprayer@gmail.com, I'd be happy to send you a copy of the flyer for these upcoming workshops and also add your name to our newsletter. So with that out of the way, we're continuing our series on the life of Bill W. And we're trying to examine this. I'm calling this series From the Inside Out, and meaning by that I want to see what it is that's going on inside of Bill. Not so much give you the history that's available in many forms, but with an eye towards what's happening at a deeper level, and even more importantly, how we might be able to benefit from that. So we began our series in episode 1 looking at Wilson's childhood traumas, how his father abandoned the family, how his mother also left him, how his girlfriend died on the operating table, and how he then went into a very deep and really almost lifelong series of depressions. And Wilson, in speaking about that, said how difficult it was for him, almost impossible, to form close relationships, and how he was driven to success. He had this unbelievable drive to prove himself, and whatever he did, it was never enough. He used the phrase, "I had to become a number one man." And then along comes alcohol, and to prop him up in that journey. And then slowly his best friend, the booze, turns against him. I think we all know how that feels. In the last episode, we were exploring some of the cracks that were beginning to build in or show themselves in Bill's ecosystem. Times when God's light seemed to break through into his darkness. And I kind of look at these as sort of mini white light experiences that he had along the way. In this episode, we're going to look at Bill's famous hot flash or white light encounter that he had in Towns Hospital. And you probably know much of the story. Ebby had been in touch with Bill. Ebby was 60 days clean and sober. He was staying at an Oxford group mission and made that famous call on Wilson. And the important thing is Wilson begins to want whatever it is that Ebby has. So in the last episode, we went with Bill down to the mission where Ebby's staying. They're having a service of some sort. Wilson shows up drunk, but in spite of that, he makes an altar call. And he senses when he does this that something is happening inside of him. The phrase he uses, he says, is, "I was hit," H-I-T, hit. And he says that there he was kneeling with those stinking alcoholic penitents. And most importantly, what he says is, "And for the first time in my life, maybe I was penitent too." So you can see the crack in Bill's armor. He gave his life to God that day in front of the group. And I really believe that this is where Bill's real spiritual experience started. It started right there at that Episcopal mission in downtown New York. So the story, as it's told in the big book, doesn't really pick up till about 3 days later. And Bill's still drinking, but he's still remembering what happened to him there. Was it real, or was his mind just playing tricks on him? He didn't know. And Bill's torn between sort of a surrender to Ebby's God power that he explained, or reserving his right to rely on his own ego power. And that's the conflict that's really going on deep inside Bill Wilson's mind. Bill writes, a conservative atheist like me shouldn't need God. And yet the truth is Ebby's simple program had worked for him. And Bill's grandiosity, hell, if this thing can work for Ebby, it can work for me. And I think that's the thing that saves many of us addicts when we come into recovery. We have to see it in other people. And when we do, it opens that possibility for us to follow along and probably even do it better than they did. We don't say that out loud. So Bill's starting to compare his alcoholism to a cancer. In many of the talks he gives, he uses that reference, and it's a cancer that's killing him. And so finally, he goes back to Towns Hospital for the fourth time. He's detoxing for the fourth time in about a year and a half. And he tells his friend at this point, Dr. Silkworth, that he's found the answer. Still a little drunk. And Silkworth says, yeah, go ahead. You know where the bedroom is. Go ahead, go up and get into bed. Put your jammies on. So Wilson's again going back and forth. He's torn up and down, surrender, don't surrender. And finally, he finds himself in a pit of real despair. And I want you to hear Bill in his own words. This is an AA talk that he gave some years later. Many copies of this available on the internet. But he explains what it was that happened to him when he was there in that detox room. So let's have a listen.
And my depression people. And at last, I hit the bottom of the pit. And I suddenly found that I had become a child, alone, and crying in the dark for a parent who did not seem to be there. And then I said, well, now I will do anything. Just like that cancer patient. I will do anything for a cure. And then in no hope at all, really, I cried out, and if there is a God, let him show himself. And then came the realization, indeed, the greatest one in my whole life. There can never be another life. It seemed to me that place lit up in the blinding glare. I was transported into an ecstasy. And I suddenly realized that I was free. And utterly lost in this strange state. In the mind's eye, I seemed to be on a mountain, and a great wind was blowing. And I perceived at once that it was not there. It was the wind of heaven. A wind of spirit. And I was free. At length, I find myself on bed. But now I lie in another world. And a great peace settled over me. I felt as one with the universe. And I thought to myself, so this is the God of the creature.
So as I said earlier, there are a number of versions of Wilson's hot flash, white light experience that you can find. But I think it's really important to understand some of the elements that are at work in this experience. And so I want to read another one. This is from his taped autobiography that I have. So this is the same time experience. You see, he writes this: the terrifying darkness had become complete. In agony of spirit, I again thought of the cancer of alcoholism, which had now consumed me in mind and spirit, and soon the body. But what of the great physician? For a brief moment, I suppose the last trace of my obstinacy was crushed out as the abyss yawned. I remember saying to myself, I'll do anything at all. If there be a great physician, I'll call upon him. Then with neither faith nor hope, I cried out, if there be a God, let him show himself. The effect was instant, electric. Suddenly my room blazed with an indescribably white light. I was seized with an ecstasy beyond description. I have no words for this. Every joy I had ever known was pale by comparison. The light, the ecstasy. I was conscious of nothing else for a time. Then, seen in the mind's eye, there was a mountain. I stood upon its summit, where a great wind blew, a wind not of air, but of spirit. In great, clean strength, it blew right through me. Then came the blazing thought, you are a free man. I know not at all how long I remained in this state, but finally the light and the ecstasy subsided. I again saw the wall of my room. As I became more quiet, a great peace stole over me, and this was accompanied by a sensation difficult to describe. I became acutely conscious of a presence which seemed like a veritable sea of living spirit. I lay on the shores of a new world. This, I thought, must be the great reality, the God of the preachers. Savoring my new world, I remained in this state for a long time. I seemed to be possessed by the absolute, and the curious conviction deepened that no matter how wrong things seemed to be, there would be no question of the ultimate rightness of God's universe. For the first time, I felt that I really belonged. I knew that I was loved and could love in return. I thanked my God, who had given me a glimpse of his absolute self. Even though a pilgrim upon an uncertain highway, I need be concerned no more, for I had glimpsed the great beyond. So um, there's Wilson's experience in two versions, and want to start picking our way through this a little bit so we can again uh, look and see what does this have to offer for us. And the first thing I want to say is that Wilson later said that this all could have been a hallucination. That at the time he was drugged up, he was part of the belladonna treatment, and that hallucinations of this type seemed to go along with that. But he also said, even if this is true, it really didn't matter. What was the important thing is that something happened to him inside. Something shifted inside. And that's what's important. Not did God show up in Bill's hospital room, uh, but did the ego system that Bill had built up to protect himself, to guard himself, to keep himself from being hurt, did it crack wide open? And when it did, was he then in the presence of something new? And maybe you noticed, and I hadn't picked this up before, but when I was listening to the tape of his recorded um, um, talk, he said something really interesting. Uh, he said just before this white light experience, he felt like a child, and I think that's really key. Here's the phrase: I suddenly found that I had become a child, alone, crying in the dark for a parent that did not seem to be there. God, if there is a God, he cries. Daddy, mommy, if you're there, help me. There's something about really regressing when real desperation uh, comes into our lives, when everything we've built up that is false comes tumbling down. Um, and so it's as if all the pains from his childhood, all those defenses that he constructed for years, somehow they began to crumble, and he's reaching out for help. But he really didn't know to whom he was reaching, and I think that's important. It's not that we have to have a belief in God when we're moving from step one to step two. Um, it's just whoever you are, whatever you are. I now realize that I need help. And then came his spiritual experience. Now, this is the quote from the big book on the nature of spiritual experience. And that's what I want to get into a little bit deeper, because I think there are some things we can learn from that. And it's basically the part we have in the big book. It's basically paraphrasing Carl Jung, the famous Swiss psychiatrist, in what he told what he told Roland Hazard, his own patient, when he was trying to encourage him to go and seek recovery. And this is basically how Jung is paraphrased. Jung says, once in a while, alcoholics have had what are called vital spiritual experiences. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and arrangements, ideas, emotions, and attitudes that were once the guiding forces of these men are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. So to me, again, at the bottom of Wilson's white light was the collapse of his own ego. And this really seems to be what's critical for genuine recovery. If you're a real alcoholic, uh, the self has to get out of the way so the true self can come and assert itself. So a few more things I want to point out in Bill's story before we dive into that. And this may help to explain some of the mountaintop and the wind and the light. Um, and you may not be aware of the spiritual experience that Bill's grandfather, Willie Wilson, had when Wilson was still a young boy. And I didn't appreciate this whole mountain scene until I visited East Dorset, where Wilson grew up. And the town's in a valley, and hovering over it is Mount Aeolus. It's part of the Green Mountain chain. It's huge, and it stretches right down to the edge of the town where Bill's home and the rest of the little community was gathered. In this scene, it's Sunday morning, and Wilson is still a young boy, and most of the town is present there in the service at the Congregational Church. And what I want to read to you now is taken from Dick B's book. It's called The Conversion of Bill W. And Dick writes this: Grandfather Wilson had a long record of alcoholism. He had tried to lick it through temperance and revival meetings, but to no avail. However, one Sunday, Grandfather William climbed to the top of Mount Aeolus, cried out to God for help, and suddenly saw a blinding light and felt a great wind. Grandfather Wilson believed he had sensed the presence of God and been saved. He rushed down to the little church, interrupted the services, seized the pulpit, announced to the congregation that he had been saved and that he was healed. Moreover, he never drank again during the remaining 8 years of his life. It probably sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? The mountaintop, the white light, a blowing wind of spirit. And that's why I think perhaps that childhood quote in Bill's recorded talk is so important, that he goes back to that childhood experience, that he was present in that church when Grandpa got up there and did that. And when he regresses, he goes back to that state and shares a similar experience to the one his own grandfather had. I want to finish up now with some quotes from another couple of books. And the first one is one that Wilson read in his detox room. He's trying to understand what it was that had just happened to him. And Ebby most likely gave him a copy of Varieties of Religious Experience, written by William James, the Harvard professor, again, whose name is mentioned in the big book. And in this, James points out 4 qualities of a spiritual experience, and we can look for them in Bill's life. Maybe more importantly, I hope we can look for them in our own experiences of the divine, however it is that may come to you, and it comes in varying and different forms. But in this book, James is looking for what is What is it about these that matches up in so many of them? Some qualities that are there. And he lists four. And the first one he says is ineffability, ineffability. And that means that there really are no words to adequately describe what it is that happens in a conversion experience like this. James writes, the subject of the experience immediately says that it defies expression, that no adequate report of its contents can be given in words. He continues, it follows from this that its quality must be directly experienced. It cannot be imparted or transferred to others. No one can make clear to another who has never had a certain feeling in what the quality or worth of it consists. One must have musical ears to know the value of a symphony. One must have been in love one's self to understand a lover's state of mind. So, whatever this new form of consciousness, this cosmic consciousness, this connection to what is beyond, you're not going to be able to explain it to somebody. You can only invite them to the experience. A second ingredient, and he uses a big word here. He says anoetic quality. And that means it has about it a sense of revelation, a sense of revelation, that something is being revealed to me, shown to me, that I could not have gotten to on my own. Again, quoting from the book. They are states of insight into depths of truth unplumbed by the discursive intellect. So this is different. It's a different experience from the usual ego mind, the thoughts that are running through it all the time. He says they are illuminations, revelations, full of significance. And as a rule, they carry with them a curious sense of authority. And this is the ongoing battle, I think, in recovery between the ego, thinking that it knows all, and the true self that's humble and teachable and knows what we need to know better than we do. And to me, this is the quality of the two-way prayer as I experienced it and have over the last 28 years or so. And when I listen to other people experiencing it, that's the way it sounds. It is a voice that knows better than they know. So I always tell people, I'm not so interested in listening to your opinion. God knows we all got those. But I am interested in listening to this voice as it speaks to you, because it comes with a certain authority. And it comes with an encompassing love and compassion that usually the individual probably lacks. Now, a psychiatrist who takes this whole conversion experience seriously explains all of this, and he's suggesting that in a real conversion experience, this is a quote, we may have awakened within us the true self. And I'm going to quote from him now. He says, at times of crisis, there may be an independent psychic energy that can emanate from the true self. It's as if the true self can act to protect itself from the suicidal annihilation by the ego and shows itself by speaking or acting out. Once the true self emerges, the ego seems to know its lesser place from then on. See, there's the shift. The person's ego begins to slowly learn there is a power greater than it, and that the ego is subservient to this higher power. Conventional psychiatry, he concludes, can offer no explanation for such voices or visions in Wilson's case. And instead, we might remember the wisdom of Shakespeare, who said, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. Third, back to William James, third quality is transiency. And that basically means these altered states of consciousness do not last very long. James says mystical states cannot be sustained for long, except in rare instances, half an hour or at most an hour or two, seems to be the limit beyond which they fade into the light of common day. So it's not a state that you're going to stay in, but they are little moments of genuine connection with the beyond. Fourth and last one, James calls passivity, and that means the experience is not under personal control. He writes, although the oncoming of mystical states may be facilitated by preliminary voluntary operations, as by fixing the attention, or going through certain bodily performances, or in other ways which manuals of mysticism prescribe. Yet, when the characteristic sort of consciousness once has set in, the mystic feels as if his own will were in abeyance, and indeed sometimes as if he were grasped and held by a superior power. It's kind of nice not to be in control for a few moments, isn't it? I really enjoy that. So Wilson, by all measures, had a genuine experience of some sort there in Towns Hospital. He felt a presence, a wind of spirit and not of air. Whatever it was, it shook him to his core. It told him there really was another world, and he was a part of it, and that this world was under the control of this something other than himself, and that in the end, that he is loved, and that all is well, and all will be well. To me, that's the message of a genuine spiritual experience, and whether it comes to us slowly or it comes dramatically. If we are alcoholics of the real variety, like Bill, come it must. And that's why the emphasis is on experience and not just awakening. See, I think we can go on awakening slowly, gradually, all this sort of stuff for years and years. And yet what seems to be needed is an experience of this. And once I have that experience, I can't deny it because it's mine. So anyway, really got into some depth there. I hope that was okay, and I hope you found this episode helpful, and the series is helpful for you as well. If you did, encourage you to invite a friend or a sponsee to join in listening to this. I really would like to get as much of this information out to people in 12-step recovery as possible. So in the next episode, we're going to look at Wilson's trying to carry this message of his own experience to other alcoholics and see what success or failures he had along the way. I think it should be fun. Again, check out our website or contact me at twowayprayer@gmail.com if you want to attend one of our upcoming workshops on Zoom or make some comments on the podcast. So thank you for listening. God bless, and keep coming back.